Hey there, I'm so glad to see you here. Welcome to part 3 of Variations in Psychological Attributes. I'm so curious to ask what you've understood of intelligence so far. Pin it in the comments section for me. I'm looking forward to reading about it. So far, guys, we've unraveled a few definitions in psychology, as well as a couple of those theories which we've kind of excavated from back in the hood. Which was your favorite theory? I would love to read about that too, so make sure to pin it here. Well, let me tell you, intelligence sure is complex, if not complicated. Therefore, despite efforts to understand the definition and so many theories, more evidence was resurrected to see whether if intelligence was all about nature or nurture. So, what is nature or nurture? Let's dive deep to explore this together today. Interestingly, nature is that part of you which is given to you naturally, genetically, biologically, physiologically. So the color of your hair, the color of your skin, your height, your blood group, all of that has to do with nature. On the contrary, nurturing is to do with the environment that you exist in. It consists of the richness and the variety of resources which are presented and available to you when needed by you, such as your schooling, such as social agents, your peers, the quality and richness of the environment that you exist within. All of that is to do with your nurturing. So you must wonder, how is it that nature and nurture play a role with intelligence? Well, we'll explore just that in about a minute. A lot of theorists, they studied the evidence of nature and nurture from their studies on identical twins, on fraternal twins, and siblings who were reared together and siblings which were reared apart. Quite interestingly, the metrics that they found with regard to studies on these individuals were a lot of theorists got curious about individual differences in intelligence, and they wondered whether these individual differences had the interplay of nature and nurture. Just like you and I, they wondered whether it had to do with the food they're eating, or the almonds they're chewing, or the thoughts that they're thinking, or just genetics that was making them intelligent. Debating about this kind of got them to think deeper about the role of nature and nurture. Now that we understand what nature and nurture is all about, just like you and me, a lot of the theorists were curious whether if intelligence was all about the kind of nature or nurturing that individual was receiving. So, to explore more, what these theorists did was they conducted a couple of studies on identical twins, on fraternal twins, and on siblings who were reared together and siblings who were reared apart. They did this little experiment to understand whether if intelligence was truly something to do with nature or something to do with nurturing. Okay, very fascinatingly, the results that came out for identical twins when they were reared together and identical twins reared apart, as well as fraternal twins and siblings, was rather interesting, and it caught a lot of attention. Let's look at the differences that were found through these tests. So as you can look at my screen, you will see a lot of evidence which came from heredity of these studies, which were conducted on adoptive individuals, on siblings, and on fraternal twins and identical twins. Interestingly, identical twins who were reared together, their correlation came out to be 0.90, which was quite high. That meant that their intelligences were quite alike. On the contrary, identical twins, when reared apart, their correlation fell a little. That meant that it was not only about nature, but nurturing. The environmental factors were playing a big role in the way that they were displaying their intelligences. Up next, we have fraternal twins. When they were reared together, their correlation was about 0.60. which was lower than identical twins. Siblings who were reared together showed this correlation of 0.50, which meant that their intelligences were living in the same house, under the same roof, with the same parents, yet having their own experiences. Their intelligences were almost about at that, decent correlation. Contrary to which, when the same siblings were reared apart in different households with different experiences or perhaps other social agents, their correlation dropped to as low as 0.25, which meant that nurturing played a drastic role in the representation of this individual's intelligence. Right? So these adopted children studies, they also reflected that intelligence is more similar to biological rather than adoptive parents. But as the child grows, the intelligence grows closer to that of the adoptive parents. So this clearly showed that the interplay of nature and nurture is so high, whereas nature being, having the larger share while the individual is younger, it is closer to the biological parent. However, as the child grows up, it is so much more to do with the adoptive parents, which is so much more to do with the nurturing aspect of intelligence. Let's further explore the role of environment, which is to do with nurturing. Okay, so far we've understood that intelligence is a complex interaction between both nature, which is to do with heredity, and nurture, which is to do with the environment in which you exist. Very interestingly, guys, it was found out that all those children from disadvantaged homes, when they were actually adopted into homes which had higher economic statuses, into those families that had the availability of all sorts of resources for this child, it was found out that the child's intelligence moved closer to the intelligence of the adoptive parents, suggesting that nurturing, which is to do the environment in which you're brought up, to be specifically more important for raising your own intelligence. Also, it was found out that environmental deprivation lowered your intelligence, unfortunately. So all things like rich nutrition, quality of schooling, good family, it actually led to an increase in your intelligence, all of which suggested that nurture was very crucial in the role of development of intelligence of an individual. To conclude about intelligence being an interesting interplay of nature and nurture, I would like to say that an individual's intelligence is dominated by the environment as well as genetic factors within. So both internal and external factors contribute to the development of an individual's intelligence. If there are any questions in your mind about this, please feel free to pin it in the comments section and I'd be happy to answer them for you. Guys, also please note that there are some notes which are being available to you for this particular content, which you should be able to write efficiently and effectively for your board exams. So if there are more questions again, please pin them here. Next, we're going to look at a very interesting aspect of intelligence. So all of us, we've been, very qualitatively, we've been talking about what intelligence is all about. Very abstractly, we found some definitions, we found theories. We also tried to quantitatively come around with intelligence being either nature or nurture. But what about assessing your intelligence? I'm very curious about that. Well, yes, you're right. There are some interesting tests which can measure your intelligence. However, the very first thought about assessment or measuring of your intelligence came around with this man called Alfred Binet. Alfred Binet in 1905, along with Theodore Simon, he very successfully tried to measure intelligence. Now, how and what he did was kind of revised in about 1908. And listen to this like a story, because they revised their own theory and came up with this scale to understand and give that concept of mental age. So what is your mental age? Mental age is basically your intellectual development relative to the kind of age group that you belong with. Okay, so there is also something known as a chronological age. Chronological age is determined by the biological age from your own birth. So I hope we understand the concept of mental age and chronological. Chronological is just biological. Mental, it is just relative measure to the age group that you belong with, which means that if you are an adolescent and if you are 16 years of age, you are expected to, display general behavior that of a 16-year-old, and that is understood by your mental age. Okay, so a bright child whose MA is more than his or her CA, which is mental age and chronological age, for a dull child, the mental age is going to be below the chronological age. Does that make sense to all of you? Okay. Interestingly, in 1912, William Stern, who was a German psychologist, he took over Alfred Binet's work and he revised it a little and came up with this thing known as IQ. Haven't we all heard of IQ? What is this intelligence quotient? So, intelligence quotient is, now that we understand mental age and chronological age, it refers to the mental age which is divided by the chronological age, which all of which is multiplied by 100. So the number 100 is obviously used as a multiplier to avoid the decimals which might show up in your intelligence. So when MA is equal to CA, which means your mental age is equivalent to biological age, which is your chronological age, the IQ will be equal to 100. Okay? On the contrary, if your mental age is more than your chronological age, your IQ will be more than 100, quite naturally, right? Also, IQ becomes less than 100 when MA is less than CA. So your IQ will be less if your mental age is lower than your chronological age. Okay, so this is a little bit about the intelligence quotient and it kind of helps you to assess intelligence. Up ahead in this chapter, we're going to connect with another interesting aspect of individuals who are intellectually gifted and intellectually deficient. So, do we come across a variety of people, some of them who exhibit qualities not seen or unlike any other in our everyday? Yes, these individuals, they belong to a part of the graph which is on either sides of the averages. These individuals are said to exhibit either higher order capacities, which are not prevalent in individuals with average intelligence, as well as those individuals who exhibit lower than the required abilities, general abilities, if I must say. All right, moving up ahead, we're going to go on to another interesting part of the chapter that talks about intellectual deficiency and intellectual giftedness. These are the two variations in intelligence. And what we'll do to make it easier for you is I will tabulate it so that you understand the concept of both the variations in these intelligences along with the various aspects that it has to offer. I would like for you to pull out a notebook pen or either your book to highlight the important keywords so that learning gets easier. Let's go. As we explore this part of the chapter, we will go slowly to understand these aspects first. If you can see them laid out on your left, let's start with the definition. Intellectual deficiency, it is a condition which is characterized by limitations in cognitive abilities and adaptive functions. That means an individual with some form of deficiency will show less than the average age, the biological age, and also therefore reflecting the mental age in terms of cognitive abilities. So the way we think about the world, we perceive the world, the way we make judgments, our thinking, reasoning, decision making will be weaker, as well as our adaptive functioning for those individuals who show intellectual deficiency. Contrary to this, individuals who show giftedness, it is actually a condition where individuals show exceptional abilities or talents in specific areas. So there are specific areas in which these individuals will be exceptionally more talented than the average individual, right? Okay. In terms of IQ, individuals with ID have 70 to 75 range of IQ. On the contrary, gifted individuals are those who get more than 130 on their IQ quotient, their intellectual quotient, right? Learning abilities, in terms of learning abilities, they have a lot slower learning pace. There are a lot of challenges. They get difficulties in learning new skills. On the contrary, for a gifted individuals, they are very fast learners. Okay, so they learn these concepts and skills faster, quicker, with more speed and accuracy as compared to an individual who will be intellectually deficient. With adaptive skills, individual with this deficiency of intelligence will tend to, kind of show that they require a lot of support, right? So adapting to change for them is something that's very difficult. They find a lot of difficulty with their everyday daily activities and require some kind of support. A gifted individual, on the contrary, will show a lot of independence, which is absolutely contrary to individuals with intellectual deficiency. They will also show great problem solving and adaptive skills. When it comes to academics, individuals with ID, they are often below average. On the contrary, gifted individuals will definitely excel in one or more subjects and show that rigor in their academic performance. They would appear to be more superior than their average peers in class. When it comes to social skills, intellectual deficient individuals, they show a lot of difficulty with social interactions. They have very poor communications and they may not understand social norms very well. Contrary to that, gifted individuals, they often are socially adept, interestingly, with a lot of strong communication skills. They show a lot of leadership abilities and they reflect that potential often in their interactions. Emotionally, intellectually deficient individuals, they really struggle to, express themselves effectively. They display a lot of confusion, they have self-esteem concerns. They also might show a lot of frustration every now and then. Contrary to which, gifted individuals, they might show a lot of sensitivity. They show emotional maturity, not just understanding the self, but also having awareness of others' emotions and needs. Okay. In terms of support, intellectually deficient individual guys, they require a lot of special support. They require a structured environment which has discipline, which has been nicely timelined all through the day for them, right? Because failing which they will show that, cringe. They might not appreciate delays and would require support as and when they need it. Contrary to which, gifted individuals, they love challenges, they love solving problems, and they love the ability to get up, thrive, and nurture the environment around them. Right? So there is a lot of independence that they thrive on and display as well. Potential careers, individuals who are intellectually deficient, they might, they will work best in a setup that is more structured, which is repetitive and less complex. On the contrary, careers for gifted individuals, they will love to get on roles which they can be creative with. Okay, examples of individuals who display intellectual deficiency are Down syndrome, autism in some cases, and with giftedness, these individuals are usually highly talented musicians, artists, and scientists of their kind. They're usually found in such individuals. Up next, we're going to look at the types of tests. So obviously, guys, when it comes to measuring intelligence, there has to be some kind of standardized formal testing, as we did in the beginning of the chapter. To standardize a test, to formalize it, we need some types of testing, right? All of us also, when we learn some interesting things in class, we sit to produce an output in terms of a unit test or a term exam. So similarly, for testing, there are some types which we're going to discover in this part of the chapter. So there are individual versus group tests, there are verbal, non-verbal performance tests, there are culture fair versus culture bias tests. So what these tests really look like, let's discover that together. The first one that we look at is called an individual test. You know how when you sit to give an exam just by yourself, maybe a retest or a unit test which you've missed out because of your absence on the actual day, that test is more like an individual test. So this test is it is administered to one person at a time, and it is absolutely personalized to measure that individual. Okay, those tests are called as personalized individual test, and an example of that is called as the Stanford Binet test. A group test, on the contrary, is a kind of test which is administered to more than few people at once. Okay, so whenever you sat to give your term exam or to give a unit test with the rest of your class, that was considered a group test, such as the IELTS test or the SATs, most commonly taken by teens. Okay, so the difference between the individual and group tests on the whole is it's in the way it is administered. Okay, with administration of individual test, it is to one individual only. With a group test, it is to a group of individuals. All right, we look at verbal, non-verbal, and performance tests. When it comes to a verbal test, these tests, they use a lot of language skills. Okay, so it involves speaking and writing both. So all of those tests which have vocabulary tests embedded in them, such as the GRE verbal or the WAIS test, these tests are examples of verbal tests. Non-verbal tests are those tests which use more like pictures, patterns, symbols instead of the language itself. So if you've ever given the intelligence tests prepared by Ravens, so Ravens progressive matrices uses symbols to measure your intelligence and is therefore understood as a non-verbal test. There is also then a performance test. These tests, they require you to perform upon certain aspects. They could probably give you a puzzle, or they could give you, those blocks to put together to create something. So whenever you have to perform upon something to create it as to measure your intelligence, those are understood as performance tests. An example of that is the Bender-Gestalt test. Last off, we have culture fair versus culture bias tests. These tests are designed to avoid cultural biases. So, and in some case, contrary to it, some of them are biased by culture too. So a culture fair test, guys, is a test which is developed specific to the culture in which it is meant to be delivered to. For example, we all are aware how Asians are different from Europeans, and Europeans are very different from Americans. It would be unfair to give out a test of intelligence which is developed for an Asian to an African, right? Because of the cultural variations. Therefore, those tests which are developed for the culture in which they are to be administered are called as culture fair tests. These tests, they measure you. We'll do culture fair, culture biased again. Okay, up next we have culture fair versus culture bias tests. Culture fair tests are those tests which can be true for any culture in which from the one that they are developed in. So let's say that there is a test which is developed for Asia, which is developed within for the continent of Asia. However, this test may also be something which is free of biases and can be used for other continents of Africa, Americas, and maybe European countries as well. Those tests are culture fair tests, which means that the items of the test are developed in a way which is not discriminatory for those belonging to other cultures. Right? So all those cultural biases are not present. They're simply unavailable in these tests. One such test, which is a culture fair test, is called as Raven's progressive matrices. We'll do culture fair tests again. Up next, we're going to do culture fair versus culture bias tests. You know how tests are developed in a specific culture. Let's say that a test is developed with some items in the continent of Asia. Now, will it be fair for us to administer this test, which was developed to be conducted on Asians, to Africans and Americans as well? Simply no, because the items of the test will be discriminatory for the ones living in another continent. These tests are culture bias tests. They are biased to the backgrounds and to the conditions of a particular continent, right? So they're not very meaningful for individuals living in another culture. Simply because they're influenced by the prevalence of the environment, language, culture, food, religion in which that test is developed for. On the contrary, there are tests which are designed to avoid those cultural biases, right? Those tests are more universal, and no matter which continent they may be developed in, it is okay for them to be kind of administered to individuals from another continent, such as the Americas. Cuts and tired. We'll do culture fair versus culture bias once more. Okay, let's look at culture fair versus culture bias tests. Culture bias tests, guys, are those tests which are developed in a particular continent, and they're biased, they're influenced by the conditions of that culture for which it is meant to be administered in. For example, will it be fair for a teen like you to take a test which was developed in the Americas? No, simply because the conditions of adolescence in the Americas, is very different from that of an Indian individual, correct? Therefore, culture fair, culture bias tests are those tests which are developed in the culture to be for an individual to be administered upon and influenced by that culture. Those tests are called culture bias tests. However, when tests are free of the culture in which they are developed in, those tests are considered to be culture fair tests. Understood? I hope you guys have enjoyed understanding the types of tests with me today. If you have any doubts or questions, please make sure to pin them to the comments section and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much for your time and your focus. I have absolutely enjoyed teaching you this part of today's lesson. See you soon. Bye.